Okay, a couple of things I thought we would do tonight. I'll tell you more about the Seminole Wars. Also, this is the week you're supposed to tell me what your research project is. A couple of you have, but I thought it might be a useful thing for us to talk about this so that if you do have a topic, you can let everyone know. If you don't, maybe we can talk about possibilities. So that's our first order of business, talk about this research project. I should have refreshed my memory about what it requires. Essentially, Lucy, you've started, so you've done this before. So can you tell us a little bit about your project? I didn't mean to pick on you because you were good enough to tell me your idea. Um,
Oh, well, yeah. So I was really interested, I guess, in the idea of mascots and how mascots specifically, I was just reading around about it and there was a phrase that stuck out to me, which was um, just using like Native Americans as part of like a quintessentially American sport,
mhm,
which is football, as like kind of
mhm.
a means of control and like asserting like a cultural superiority. And I was like, that's really interesting. I never thought about that. And then I was thinking back to how like my school recently banned or redid their mascot, and a lot of other schools on Cape Cod did as well.
Mhm.
And a lot of the towns that we live in are like Barnstable or like Nauset is my school. So there are obviously names that come from Native American, names of the area. But I'm, thinking the culture that I live in, like why on earth was that, like why were Native Americans used in the first place? Like in my school and the places around me, it just didn't
So
seem
did you
like
go to Nauset?
I did, yeah.
Well, that is the name of an Indian group.
Exactly, yeah, but I was like the school was like the high school kind of didn't come around until like
Mhm.
the 60s, 70s. And I was like, I don't know, it just didn't really occur to me when there are so many other things to do. I don't know. So I wanted to specifically look at mascots and like how they can
Now,
be
what was
used
your
as
mascot?
a Native American like warrior, like
Okay.
the very typical thing. And then
Mhm.
we changed it and it was just an N. And I was like, that's pretty cool. But at the time that that happened, I was also like, why didn't we do that earlier? Like it's like 2016
Mhm.
feels like in the culture that I live in, could have done this in like the 80s. Like that's
Okay.
kind of weird.
Okay.
So yeah.
So, let's see. Who else has a? So, what are you doing for research? You said you've been reading around. Where have you found things?
I've mostly just been looking on like Sawyer right now. The Sawyer
Okay.
is where
Like,
everything is at.
okay. Good. Good. Trevor, do you have a project in mind?
So I'm between two. I haven't dug too far into either one of them. Um, the first one that I thought was interesting was the one you had on the syllabus about Native Americans in movies.
Hmm. That's a good
Um,
one.
so I was going to look more into that. But my backup was how the railroad affected Native Americans.
That's another good one. So you haven't really done much more than think, hey, one of these would be interesting.
I typed them into Google,
Okay,
so
well, that's a start. That's
I was proud of
good.
that.
And what did you find when you typed them into Google?
Well, I just wanted to make sure more for the railroad one that there would be actual like literature on it, and it seemed like something that like scholars were talking about.
Hmm. Good. Did you try going to JSTOR to see if there's anything, any scholar? Do people know about JSTOR? I see people nodding. One semester I began to explain how to use JSTOR, and someone said, "Oh, we all know all about that." Then I got their papers, and apparently they didn't. So I don't need to be nodding just so I won't tell you, but that's a great source. And Google is easier, I admit. Um, but yeah, go to JSTOR, type in Native American or Indians railroads, and see what happens. And or you might decide you want to do movies. And there is that movie, I think it's on our list, Real Indian, which is a very good documentary about Indians in the movies. And that certainly would be worth looking at as you're beginning. It would be worth watching anyway. Okay. But either one of those sounds like it would be good. Okay. So, Jeff, do you have something in mind?
Um, Not specifically, but I guess that if I were to look into a specific topic, I'd probably look into Native American gaming and casinos, just like how they've changed the culture around just like the
That's
topic
good.
of Native Americans today.
That's a very good topic, and there's certainly a lot going on there. Yeah, good. So the same thing that Lucy and I think if you just type in casinos, you'll get all kinds of different things. But so, looking at, there's been a lot written about that, and in fact, there's Suffolk's Law School has people actually involved in this. So. Involved in helping set up casinos, not involved in going to Foxwoods every week to try to increase their earnings. But yeah, interesting subject. Good. Patrick, do you have something in mind?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Trevor in that I'm split between two ideas.
Okay.
My first one that I'm thinking is looking closer into the relationships between the Black slaves and the Seminole,
Mm-hmm.
just because I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
There's also been a good amount written on it from what I've looked into. So,
Okay. So what have you found that's been written on it?
well, there's like I went on JSTOR and there's just a bunch of stuff about the
Good.
ethnogenesis of basically a new culture.
Good. Good. That's good. That would be a very good topic. And what's your other idea?
My other idea is to do it on the recent kind of surge of Native American tourism.
That's interesting.
That kind of created industry that they've started.
Like where? Is there any place in particular?
No place in particular, no. Not
Okay.
yet. At least not from what I've seen. Just kind of like the whole movement.
That's interesting.
So,
Either one of those would be really interesting, I think. So yeah, so good. Good. Harrison, do you have something in mind?
Not really right now.
Okay.
Just be honest.
Okay. I appreciate honesty. Good. Good. Well, you can give it some more thought now that you hear all these other really good ideas, and it's
Yeah,
okay
exactly.
to do something someone else is doing too, but good. Tessa, do you have something in mind?
Yeah, I was kind of between two topics as well. I was thinking of doing women and how the lives of Native women changed. And then I was also looking at the movies topic.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'll probably go with the women.
Okay, good. That's good. I know there is a fairly recent book on that subject. Have you found anything on it? You'll probably
No,
have
I
found the
haven't
book.
started
Okay.
looking at it.
It's a long title, but the last part is The Corn Mothers Went Away. That's one book. But
Okay.
then I know there are also a lot of articles on JSTOR about that, dealing with particular places and people. So that would be either one of those would be good.
Okay.
I think just in general, for those of you who are stumped, the movies always would be a good thing, because there are many different movies, many different depictions, and so that's kind of a wide open field. Alessandro and Chadi were just talking about the research projects which are looming, and people are telling us either what they've thought of or that they haven't yet thought of anything, and so they're borrowing ideas from everyone else. So Savannah, do you have something in mind?
I'm kind of between two as well. The alcohol and drugs one interested me a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and also the movies. So I'm just, I don't know, thinking about between the two.
Okay. Good. Either one's good. Have you done any looking into what's available? Either one yet?
Not really.
Okay. That's good. It would be a good step just to see which way you want to go. Okay. Alessandro, do you want to tell us if what you're thinking of?
Honestly, I'm still looking around a few topics.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't really made any definitive decisions yet.
But other people haven't either. Do you have anything in mind, like among the things you might like to do?
I don't know. I was actually, I don't know. I don't know if you remember the question that I asked or that I failed to ask last class. I was gonna try to see if I can find something sort of similar to that situation.
Okay.
Gone.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah. Okay. Good. Very good. Sam, what's on your mind?
I was looking at like hallucinogens and the role that it played in our culture. I thought that that was interesting.
That is, yeah. Good. Any particular ones you're looking at?
I was looking it up, and there's just a lot of different ones that
Mhm.
are available and that they use. So I'm not really sure if I should like which ones I should cover, but I'll probably just find like ones that were the most important, I guess.
Okay. And this is for research purposes and not for experimentation purposes, I'm
Yeah.
guessing. Good, yeah, good. Um, yeah, and there was this actually a Supreme Court case on this in the early 1990s about whether, peyote use among in the Native American church. But anyway, that's an interesting
Yeah.
topic. Okay. Let's see, Alex, do you have something in mind?
Yes, I was thinking about looking at the different diseases that Europeans brought over to the Americas when they
Okay.
first landed. And I want to look at to the extent of like how God may have changed their way of life over time, or like the
Okay.
numbers of the different tribes and how
Okay.
that affected them.
That's definitely a good subject. Probably the class. Have you done any looking as to what's there? What literature?
Honestly, no, I haven't yet.
Okay.
I haven't done too much research.
There is a classic book by Alfred Crosby called The Columbian Exchange, which probably would be a good place to start. It does talk about the diseases. And then there are other books specifically on disease among Native Americans. Also, there, by the way, there are also some books about the colonial period with alcohol and disease. For those who are thinking about alcohol, there's a guy named Peter Mancall who wrote a lot about Native Americans and alcohol in the 18th century. But yeah, so the Columbian Exchange, and then I know there's been a lot written on diseases. So that would be a very good topic. I think with a topic like that, narrowing it down may be a good thing to do. But good. No, that sounds promising. Let's see, Andrew, do you have something in mind?
Yeah, I was looking into the casinos topic a little bit, and
Okay.
I also on the syllabus I saw education. That kind of interested me too.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, either one of those would be good. Education, there's the whole Indian boarding school movement that we haven't gotten to yet. That's really, and I posted on the Blackboard site a number of documentaries about the Indian boarding schools, which would be interesting. I mean, that comes up a lot, and education does come up a lot. So either one of those would be very good. Since there already is at least one other person thinking about casinos. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it if someone else is. If it interests you, you should do it. But yeah, either one of those sound like they would be good. Shadi, what do you have in mind?
I haven't really picked a topic yet, but I was looking at citizenship versus sobriety. That kind of
Citizenship versus sobriety actually sounds like an interesting choice. Yeah, but you're thinking of those as two different topics and not.
No, I just
not a choice.
I don't know if I'm really I might want to do something else, but I haven't really explored.
Okay, either one of those or something else. Okay, yeah. Good. Okay, well, some of you have good topics and seem to be well on your way, and others are thinking about good topics. So keep doing that. If you have any questions, you can send me an email, and we'll see what I can suggest, or put you in touch with someone else in the class who's already well ahead, and they'll be happy to share what they've done with you. No, maybe. Okay, good. So let us see where we were last time. Last time I realized I was kind of giving a monologue about the Seminole Wars, and I don't know if I was quite conveying what was happening. This is a long and bloody conflict, and all kinds of interesting things are happening. And one thing that really struck me as I was talking is most of you have said you've been to Florida. Florida does loom kind of large in the New England mind, and it will loom even larger in January and February. I was talking about, the figure of Osceola is an important one for Florida's history. And as with Black Hawk, he is someone who fights against the United States and then becomes a hero among Americans. So Florida has him as their representative in Statuary Hall. And in fact, I haven't yet gotten to how he comes to die. And he's actually was buried in Charleston, South Carolina. And it's been a campaign by every successive governor of Florida to try to get his body brought back to Florida, which is kind of a fascinating thing if you think about it. I mean, the reason there is a governor of Florida is because they defeated Osceola and the Seminoles, and yet, well, defeated in one sense. The Miccosukes, we haven't yet gotten to the 1850s Seminole War, which is sometimes called Sam Jones's War. He's one of the last remaining Seminole warrior chiefs in Florida, and they never actually surrender to the United States. And it's really a point of pride among them. And so saying they were defeated may be stretching it a bit. But here, the repatriation or attempt to repatriate Osceola's bones, and he becomes this romantic figure, thinking is he died because he was removed from his native soil. This is at a time when the United States is in fact removing native people from their own soil. But I think one thing it illustrates is there's a big division of opinion among Americans about the ethics of doing this, about the justification for doing this. And so that's an important thing to remember. Even a guy like Jackson, and whom, you know, we can quite roundly, in fact, I once did hear a very eminent scholar give a lecture arguing that Jackson really wasn't a racist, and because he says all the things Jackson says positive about Native people. And he does adopt an Indian after the Creek War. And but yeah, saying because he was really liked the Indians, he didn't want to have them all die. So that's why he wanted to remove them to Oklahoma. There's this ambivalence, I suppose, about what's happening. You find very few people who will say, yes, we want to kill all the Indians. And I think one reason they stand out so is there are few of them, but they're expressing something that's happening. And here you have a figure like Osceola, who becomes a romantic hero for Americans, particularly not those who are in Florida. And anyway, it's a fascinating thing with the glorification or apotheosis of Osceola, who does emerge in this as the real warrior leader, not really supplanting the others, but when he, according to legend, stabs the treaty on the table, this is something that makes him a guy, you know, you can see a movie being made about this, just as you could see a movie made about the leader of the Creeks when Jackson, well, anyway, that's a story for another day. But as I was thinking about this, I'm just thinking about how persistent, even though the Seminole War is all but forgotten, you see markers of it in Florida. So last time I talked about Dade's expedition to the relief of Fort King, and we saw on the map the site of Dade's massacre, and poor Lieutenant Francis Dade, who's he and his men are killed here. Let me throw out a question for you. Does anyone know the name of the largest county in Florida, largest in population? Counties are very important. Dade County, yes, thank you. Trevor kind of sees this game. Yeah, so Dade County, it's where Miami is. So there is his name. And then you see, oh, do you have that on your shirt? Are you holding up your shirt or are you just gesturing?
It's just the Dolphins.
Yeah, so the Miami Dolphins play, of course, in Dade County, which is, yes, so good. So, and then we'll talk about others. I'll ask you if you've ever heard that name. I mentioned the early governor of Florida, Gabriel Duval. And anyone know what the largest city in the United States in terms of area is?
Is it Jacksonville?
It is Jacksonville. And do you know what county Jacksonville is in?
Duval.
Duval County, very good. And here's one that anyone can wait. This might be like the double Jeopardy round. Who is Jacksonville named for? See, Trevor thought that's too easy. I'm going to let someone else answer. Yes, Trevor, you want to, do you know?
Andrew Jackson.
It is named for Andrew Jackson. Yes, thank you. Okay, good. So we'll see more of this as we go on. And so just now, as I think I left off, you have this seemingly small Seminole group, Seminole bands in Florida, and an increasing number of American troops being sent to fight them. And each successive American officer thinks that he has the way to finally win this war. It's, I suppose it's one of the reasons why studies of the Seminole War had been, pretty much non-existent until the 1960s. And then in the 1960s, there are a number of books about the Seminole War, because you have this A, somewhat jungle terrain, and then B, an enemy that it's hard to find, and an increasing regular army presence that tries to fight this enemy, which keeps disappearing. Duncan Clinch is the general sent next, and he has 200 regulars, and there are 500 Florida volunteers, and they're commanded by a Richard Call. And they think what we'll do is we'll go attack this large Indian village that is south of the Withlacoochee River. And unbeknownst to them, of course, the native people know the terrain much better than they do. They're looking at a map, and the native people know this area. And there is a ford over the river where the Indians are waiting, and Clinch and Cole don't know anything about it. And they Cole and Clinch on the north shore of the Withlacoochee build rafts so they can get across the river. They don't know there's a way to cross. That's why the Indians are waiting at the ford, knowing the Americans are going to come across here. Where else would they come? Well, the Americans don't know you can cross the river there. And so they Americans build rafts and cross about 2 miles away. And then on the 31st of December, there are about 200 troops still on the north side of the river, and about 200 crossing the river, and another 200 have made it across. So this is a critical time. If you're going to attack, this is the time to do it. You don't attack when everyone is on the other side. You don't attack when everyone is on your side. You attack when they're still in transit, when they've divided their force. And the Indians attack, and they inflict very heavy casualties. And here, General Clinch thought, finally, I'm going to get to attack this Indian village, and that'll pretty much put an end to the war. But in crossing the river, gets attacked, and this is yet another disaster for the Americans. And a month later, January 31st of 1836, General Winfield Scott is put in charge of all of the American forces in Florida. And Scott is, well, he's about 56. He must be about 50 years old at this time. He has a long career in the Army, and he is put in charge here along with two other generals, and one is Thomas Jessup, who's the quartermaster general. The quartermaster, does everyone know what a quartermaster does? Who can tell us what a quartermaster does? No one can. Anyone heard the term before? See, here I am talking happily away about this, throwing out all these military terms, and then quartermaster stumps us. A very important position in a military force.
They be in charge of like supplies and stuff.
Exactly. The quartermaster is in charge of supplies. So yes, very important, critical thing. Usually not someone who is fighting, but someone who is a good administrator. And by the way, if you are looking to advance in the military, the most critical thing you can do is be a good administrator, as usually we've found. If you're inept at running things, you're not going to get very far. So quartermaster in charge of supplies. And then Edmund Gaines. And Gaines hears about this trouble on the Withlacoochee, and so he decides he should go and help out. And Gaines actually hears this news when he's in New Orleans. He does set out. He leaves New Orleans with about 1,100 troops by boat for Fort Brooke. They get to Fort Brooke and they start marching north. Remember, they had heard about Dade's disaster. They find the site of the Dade battle, And they bury the bodies of Dade and his men. They're horrified how the bodies have been mutilated. Of course, the bodies have been out there for a month or more than a month. And it's so they're probably not in good shape. They get to Fort King. There aren't sufficient provisions at Fort King, so they turn back. And as Gaines is crossing the Withlacoochee River, he is attacked by Osceola and about 1,500 warriors. This is actually the entire force of the Seminole Nation. Every available warrior is there at the Withlacoochee to attack Gaines. And Gaines was really hoping to get there and attack them before Scott arrived. Gaines and Scott really don't like each other. And now they've been put in charge along with Jessup of this operation. And of course, they're very jealous that the other one might get the credit for doing something that I want to do. And so Gaines is, he is crossing the Withlacoochee River, attacked by Osceola, and he has his men build a breastwork, and he sends a dispatch back to General Clinch, the guy who got attacked earlier on the Withlacoochee, saying, "Can you help us out?" And the problem is that General Scott, anticipating the Gaines might go to Florida and get in trouble, had ordered Clinch not to help him out. You know, this is extraordinary thing. By the way, does anyone know in what city you would find the University of Florida? Yes, Trevor.
Is it Gainesville?
It is Gainesville. Yes. Okay. Very good. So Gaines is, now kind of holed up here. He names his fort Fort Izard after one of his lieutenants who got killed in the attack on the Withlacoochee. But now they're surrounded by the entire force of the Seminole Nation. They're under siege. They wind up having to kill all of their horses and mules to eat so they can have food. And while they are in this dire situation, the Seminoles have Abraham go and try to set up a parley under a white flag. Abraham, along with Osceola, Jumper, Alligator, go up to the fort, and they say, "We're tired of fighting, and we'll go south of the river, south of the Withlacoochee, if we don't have to leave Florida. That is, we don't want to leave Florida, but we'll go south." And Gaines says, "I'm not authorized to make any kind of arrangements like that, but I will pass this along to the government officials." And so there they are, holed up in the fort, negotiating, and the Indians are leaving. And just as the Indians are leaving, General Clinch and his men arrive. They see the Indians and they open fire on them. And the Seminoles then vanish into the swampy wastes of Florida. Now, this pretty much ends phase one of the Seminole War, this standoff at Fort Izard on the Withlacoochee River. Now, the next phase begins in March, because here you have yet another offer by someone who thinks he knows how to win the war. And this is Richard Call. And Call, you'll recall, had been with General Clinch at that ill-fated attempt to cross the Withlacoochee, but he now has become governor of Florida. And he becomes governor of Florida, actually, because he is a real political ally of Andrew Jackson, who is the president. And he writes to Jackson, that is, Call writes to Jackson, saying, "Put me in charge of everything, unlike these bumbling guys from the army, and I'll do a better job. We'll use the Withlacoochee as a supply line into the heart of the Seminole territory, and we'll defeat Osceola in his stronghold." It's really a bold promise. And again, if you're looking at a map, this would be what you'd probably propose too. Why don't we just go up this river? And it seems to be their stronghold. So Jackson puts Call in charge of all American troops, including 1,500 volunteers from Tennessee. By the way, anyone know what Tennessee's nickname is? Yeah, I want to have someone other than Trevor answer this, because I think everyone else is either just deferring to Trevor or getting discouraged, because Trevor knows that at any minute now I'm just going to turn the class over to Trevor. And if you want to, you probably want to thinking, boy, could we vote on that? Yeah, why wait a few minutes? Why not do that now? Well, you know, I was looking at a syllabus for this class the other day and I saw all these quizzes, but then I checked again. It was actually the syllabus from 2016 when I gave more quizzes. And now I'm kind of disappointed. I think it would keep you on your toes if you had to know more stuff. I think maybe Trevor was looking at that same syllabus, so he really prepared. He's been preparing for years. The question is, what is Tennessee's motto? Okay, Trevor.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask for the mascot of the University of Tennessee.
Oh, what is the mascot of the University of Tennessee?
The Bulls and the Volunteers.
Okay, so the Bulls and Volunteers?
But like the Bulls is the short nickname of the Volunteers.
The Volunteers, okay. So is Tennessee the Bull State?
I think they're the Volunteers.
They're the Volunteer State, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So these 1,500 Tennessee Volunteers come and not surprisingly call and doesn't get the job done. Jackson winds up firing him and then puts Thomas Jessup in charge. Jessup, remember, the quartermaster. And in April, Jessup thinks he's negotiated a settlement with the Indians. And one of the big sticking points had been Jackson wanted to remove the Seminoles, but the black Seminoles, he wanted to be sold as slaves. And the Seminoles, the Micanopy, Alligator, the others wouldn't go along with that. But now Jessup says, okay, if we'll let the free black Seminoles and the enslaved Seminoles go to Oklahoma as well. And this time Micanopy, Alligator, Jumper, and Abraham all concur, and they start bringing all their people to Fort Brooke. Meanwhile, Osceola, along with Wildcat and John Cavallo and Sam Jones, they know we don't like that deal either. And also the planters in Florida, the guys who have set up cotton plantations on the Panhandle and in the north of Florida also protest because they say a lot of these slaves being taken to Oklahoma actually belong to us and they ran away and we want to get them back. So now Jessup modifies the order and says, okay, if you had these slaves, if these guys were with you before the war started, then they can go to Oklahoma. If they've joined you since the war began, or if they've been captured during the war, then no, they stay and they go back to being slaves. This, of course, upsets the Seminoles, but it also upsets abolitionists up in New England. And remember, New England, there is an anti-slavery movement that's become pretty active in New England at this time. And they hadn't been wild about the war either. You know, the abolitionists typically didn't like wars. And so they hadn't liked the war. And now suddenly the war says, hey, we're going to return people to slavery. The abolitionists say that's a terrible idea. And then when Jessup does allow slave catchers to go into Fort Brooke to round up people they claim had been enslaved and had run away to join the Seminoles. And as this is happening, about 700 red and black Seminoles are now in Fort Brooke, waiting to be sent off to Oklahoma. And while this is happening, Osceola, Wildcat, Sam Jones, John Cavallo, and about 200 warriors attack the fort. They overpower the Army Guard and they release Micanopy and the other Seminoles who were inside. So Jessup had arranged this great truce and he's going to send these 700 people to Oklahoma. Then there was this issue over whether they're enslaved, the black Seminoles could go with them. Some of them were. And now you have the Seminoles who had rejected the treaty, storming, attacking the fort, and actually succeeding. Imagine that. Now, Jessup, I suppose, has a choice here, either recognizing that he's defeated by these guys or getting tough. And so Jessup decides to get tough. So his troops go and capture Amathla, one of the leading Seminoles, and they hold him at Fort Marion in St. Augustine. and he is there, and Wildcat, another of the Seminole warriors, comes in with a white feather, a time of truce. You know, he's fighting, here's a white feather, let's talk. And Jessup gives Wildcat 2 weeks to bring Osceola and his followers in for a conference. And then Wildcat and his followers are imprisoned in a cell that was thought to be escape-proof. And actually, Osceola, the others, come into Fort Marion, and instead of coming into parley, Jessup locks them in a cell, in an escape-proof cell. And when I say the cell is escape-proof, I think you know what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? Anyone but Trevor? Yes, Patrick.
They escape.
They escape, exactly. What would be the point of saying it's escape-proof if I don't say they escape? Yes. And so they escape. Osceola now has malaria, and he's too ill to escape. But you can see this is going to raise a real concern among troops about, boy, we had all their leaders in an escape-proof cell. They get out. We have 700 held in Fort Brooke, and the Seminoles attack and release them. Is it actually possible to defeat this particular enemy? And after the escape of Wildcat and the others, Osceola is transferred. They say, we have to get him out of Florida. So they take him up to Fort Moultrie in Charleston, South Carolina, along with 2 of his wives. According to the story, it's 2 of his favorite wives. I don't know how the least favorite wives, I guess they stayed in Florida. And his children stay with him. And while he is there, George Catlin, an artist, came to paint him. Catlin, in the early 19th century, painted a lot of Native American leaders. So the one image we have of Osceola is painted when he's in Fort Moultrie, and Osceola puts on his war regalia, and he's, of course, dying of malaria as he is painted, but it is one of these very powerful images that Catlin painted, and one of the ways that one of the reasons Osceola becomes this romantic figure. And he dies on the 30th of January of 1838. Actually, he knows he is dying. He has his favorite wife dress him in his full military regalia so he can die like a warrior, which he does. And then he's buried in Fort Moultrie in a grave that says Osceola, patriot and warrior. Again, he's being held essentially as a prisoner of war, but we're recognizing that he is a patriot and a warrior. And he says died at Fort Moultrie, January 30th, 1838. Now, it's even a weirder story than that, because the doctor who attended him cut off his head to keep as a souvenir. And this, you know, I should say this wasn't just, well, I guess it is a bizarre thing, but 19th century, there was a fascination with what was called phrenology. The study and the thinking was you can tell a lot about a person by the shape of his or her head. And so there's a certain, what shall we say, scientific interest in looking at the shapes of someone's head. And in fact, you might see a model of a head in which the phrenologists mark out different character traits that are determined by what is directly below that in the brain. Remember, there's really no way of looking into the brain and determining how that works. And so it's one of the age-old questions. How come some people do good things, some people do bad things, some people are really smart, some aren't? How do we know this? How do we understand what makes people work? So phrenology is trying to unlock that by looking at the outside of the head and trying to discern what's in it. So it's not simply that this doctor was kind of a savage kook, but he had an interest. Well, maybe he was. Maybe I don't know, maybe one of you should contact the New York Board of Ethics to see if that's actually something he should have done. I'm not giving you his name for fear you're going to start a Twitter petition to have him, if anyone heard of this doctor again. I'll tell you what happens. He takes it home, and apparently he's not really studying it to see what made Osceola tick, and apparently doesn't have a workshop filled with heads of eminent people that he can pull out. What he does is if his son, who's quite young, misbehaves, the doctor would put Osceola's skull on the bedpost as kind of a warning to him. This is kind of weird. And then he gives the skull when he dies. I guess the son didn't really want it when the doctor died after that kind of morbid thing. So he gives it to his son-in-law, who's also a doctor. His daughter grows up, marries a doctor, another doctor. Yeah, I like Osceola's skull. And he gives it to a professor at the NYU School of Medicine. Okay, so the skull winds up at the NYU School of Medicine, where presumably budding New York doctors could see the skull of Osceola. In fact, looking at skeletons was something doctors then did quite a lot of. I suppose they do a lot of it now, too. In fact, I would be a little skeptical of a doctor who had never seen a skeleton and didn't know how one held together. Now, we know where the rest of Osceola's body is, still at Fort Moultrie. We don't know where his skull is, because at some point there was a fire that destroyed that part of the NYU School of Medicine. Although we don't know, did the professor take it home? So the skull is missing. That could be a mystery. Those of you who haven't yet found a research topic yet can latch on to finding Osceola's skull and repatriating it. Okay. So that's it. Osceola, patriot and warrior, and he dies in January. And at about the same time, actually, another group of Tennessee volunteers arrived in Florida, and they're led by Major William Lauderdale. And Jackson at this point, Jackson is president, or he's a former president now. His term ended in March of 1837. And he's getting kind of annoyed at this because he keeps sending, more guys keep going there and don't do anything. And Jackson says, with a force of 50 women, I could whip every Indian in Florida. I don't think anyone wants to put him to that particular challenge. I'm just trying to think of the 50 women who might volunteer to go with Jackson on that particular expedition. He might have just being hyperbolic with that. But now what Jessup does is start to send columns of troops down the Florida Peninsula. And at this time, Jessup has 9,000 men, and something like half, more than half of the regular troops in the United States Army are in Florida. That is 4,000 men in the regular army and about 5,000 militia troops from Florida, Tennessee, other places. The Seminoles have 1,500 warriors and 600 black allies. Jackson estimates that they have 600 warriors, 250 blacks. And how come this army of 9,000 men can't defeat them? I think some of you are probably saying, yeah, I could take 50 women down there and do this. And, it's mind-boggling. So you have these different columns moving down, one led by a guy named Powell that builds a Fort Pierce, named for the commander, Colonel Benjamin Pierce. And yes, there is a Fort Pierce in Florida. Trevor is checking that one off. And another column led by Zachary Taylor. Taylor is mainly regulars along with Missouri volunteers. And he has 800 men. And they do engage a Seminole force of about 380 Seminoles. You have 800 of Taylor's men fighting 380 Seminoles, led by Wildcat, Alligator, Sam Jones, John Cavallo, the Black Warriors. And it happens near Lake Okeechobee, big lake in the southern central part of Florida. And since it's called the Battle of Lake Okeechobee, I was going to ask Trevor if he knew the name of that battle that happened near Lake Okeechobee, but I think he's getting tired of the easy questions. He wants something a little more difficult. So we'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, the battle itself is not really a decisive victory for either side. Taylor has 26 men killed, 112 wounded. The Seminoles, smaller force, lose 11 men, 14 are wounded. Among those killed was the commander of the Missouri Volunteers, and Taylor, notwithstanding the fact that it's kind of a standoff, had this big battle against the leadership of the Seminoles and unlike the other commanders who had engaged the Seminoles, he did not lose. Therefore, when he sends in his report, he says it was a victory. We defeated them. And, who's going to contradict him? The Seminoles aren't reading his dispatches saying, no, that's not the way it happened. There aren't reporters embedded on the scene saying, well, no. He sends the report in saying, yep, we defeated them here. And now it's up to these other columns moving down the state of Florida to do their job. I did my part. And of course, the fact that Taylor sends in his report, which seems to indicate a victory, means that he gets promoted to general. Okay. Now, at about the same time this is happening, Powell fights the group of Seminoles at Jupiter Inlet. And Trevor's immediately going to say, oh, Jupiter, isn't that where the Mets train? And, the Mets are up further up. It's the Cardinals the Phillies and the Marlins who are Jupiter. And so he's scouting the area, not knowing that Sam Jones and his group are also in this area. And Powell does capture a Seminole woman who then acts as their guide, takes them where the Seminoles are, and Powell orders them to charge across the swamp. Probably not a good thing to do. And the leader of this charge is also a lieutenant in the Navy. Another good thing not to do is to have a naval officer leading a charge on land. Sailors really don't march. They don't do the kinds of things you expect. I know I'm giving you too much military strategy, and you're really wondering, did you suddenly find yourself at the Naval War College or West Point instead of at a respectable liberal arts school in Boston surrounded by civilians? And Lieutenant Horace Harrison is killed, and it's probably why one of the other expeditions is going to name a fort on the west coast of Florida, Fort Harrison. Trevor knew that one too, because Trevor is our man about all things Florida. His men flee. And it's only his Joseph Johnston, his rear guard, who prevents a complete massacre, a complete rout at the battle here at Jupiter Inlet. Now, after this, Jessup sees this happening. He's determined now to get tough with the Indians here. The fact that we've had this defeat at Jupiter Inlet means we have to get a little tougher at Jupiter Inlet. So he is going to go back there and take this area. This is the area around the Loxahatchee. Now, the Indians know the terrain better, and they position themselves on the relatively high ground in this swampy area, and the American troops are on the other side of a swamp. And the Indians actually had cut the sawgrass lining the swamp to give themselves better exposure to the troops. And the soldiers have to go through the swamp carrying their guns over their heads, because if the guns get wet, they're no good. And the Seminoles are actually pulling them further into this swamp, which is what they want to do. Jessup and his men think we're really got them on the run now. They don't realize we're being pulled into this swamp, and they know what's on the inside of the swamp. We don't. General Jessup arrives on the scene on his horse. He dismounts. He tells the Tennessee Volunteers, "Follow me." And with his pistol drawn, he charges ahead to the riverbank to fight the Seminoles. And then so he looks around and realizes that the Tennessee Volunteers didn't follow him. So there he is all by himself. And someone fires a musket, and it breaks his glasses. A fortunate thing, he was wearing glasses. And it's an inconclusive battle, notwithstanding. And after this, of course, the remaining Seminoles are fleeing south. And Jessup, of course, sees he has problems with the Tennessee and Alabama Volunteers. And then the Seminoles also are being weakened. Two of Sam Jones's lieutenants want to negotiate. And in March of 1838, there is a ceasefire in the war. And at this point, Jessup thinks, okay, why not let the Seminoles stay here? I mean, what's the purpose of fighting this big war if they keep drawing us into ambushes, wearing us down, killing our men? why not let them stay? And by the way, the thinking is Florida really isn't worth much to anyone else. So no one's going to be moving into this swampy area the way they're moving into Alabama and Mississippi. So Jessup does say, okay, why don't we let the Seminoles stay? The Secretary of War says, absolutely not. We have to remove them. And he orders Jessup to arrest all of the Seminoles. So something like 513 Seminoles now were arrested. And so by this time, there's a total of about 600 red and black Seminoles in custody of the United States Army. And Jessup, again, sees the futility of trying to remove them from land no one can use. Major Lauderdale is sent off to find more Indians down a new river in South Florida. So he goes south looking for Wildcat and Sam Jones and Alligator, and he builds a military trail going south from, and it ends at a new fort that he builds. And does anyone other than Trevor know the name of the fort that Lieutenant Lauderdale builds in South Florida?
Could I
Yes.
take a stab at it?
You can take a stab at it, Lucy, yes.
Could I say Fort Lauderdale?
You could say Fort Lauderdale, and you would be right. I see Patrick had his hand up too, so he knew that one. Others of you weren't going to dignify the question with an answer. It seems too easy. And of course, if you've ever been to Fort Lauderdale, you know one of the main roads that goes through all of the towns on the east coast of Florida is Military Trail, which is the road that Lieutenant Lauderdale and his men built. Okay, so I hope someone's keeping track of all of the useful and interesting information I'm giving you tonight, whether you find yourself leading sailors across a swamp to attack an enemy you can't really see. I think what you should have learned is don't try that, or names of places in Florida. And Lauderdale builds this fort. Jessup, relieved of his command, replaced by Zachary Taylor, who then says, why don't we just build roads, which is what Taylor starts to do. And at this point, some of the Seminoles have been removed to Oklahoma. Others now are still there. And things are relatively peaceful until another Seminole leader attacks the forces around Tampa Bay. And now another change in leadership, and the United States says, well, why don't we just let the rest of them stay? Against that idea are some of the new militant folks in Florida, militant white folks in Florida who have, you know, they have the plantations, and they've been seeing this war kind of unfolding in a way that isn't really satisfactory to them. So they are not in favor of letting the Seminole stay. And we have, over the next several years, a series of skirmishes, fights between those who remain and those who, and the whites who are there. And the fighting goes on. Sam Jones and his followers took to the swamp. 3,800 Seminoles were removed from Florida, but a large contingent remained. William Tecumseh Sherman is one of the young officers who is involved in this war. A lot of the young officers who would later be involved in the Civil War were involved in this one. And Sherman thinks that the war was really a pointless one. Florida, he said, was the Indians' paradise. It was of little use to us, and it was a great pity to remove the Seminoles at all, for we would have collected in Florida all the Choctaws, Creeks, Cherokees, Chickasaws, in addition to the Seminole. They would have thrived in the peninsula, whereas they now occupy lands that are very valuable in Oklahoma. That is, Sherman and a lot of other Americans think, you know, Oklahoma is a lot more valuable to us than Florida is. And now the lands they have in Oklahoma are coveted by their white neighbors on all sides, while the peninsula of Florida still remains with a population less than could make a good state. He's writing this 40 years later, a long time after, not seeing that, you know, well, today, in fact, there are about 4,000 or so Seminoles still in Florida, and most of them are descended from the ones who remain behind. And it's those Seminoles who were responsible for opening the bingo parlors in the 1980s, which led to the Indian Gaming Act of 1988. So that is the conclusion of the Seminole War. Wow, I've been talking for a long time, and you all deserve a break, I think. You all deserve actually applause for having endured that rendition of the Seminole War. And are there any questions on this episode? Okay. Why don't we at this time take a short break, and when we come back, I have something different in mind for us to do. Okay. So come back in about 5 or 10 minutes, and there will be more exciting things in the world of Native American history for us to talk about.